Final Fantasy XI came from a different generation of gaming and is often criticized for not respecting the player's time, at least in 2021. But it got me thinking, what if it was even worse? Guys, as I bounce back and forth between a private server experience and retail, I'm constantly reminded of the small updates that allow Final Fantasy XI to be a little bit more approachable in more modern years, modern times. Modern times makes it sound like talking about playing Final Fantasy XI back in the early 1900s. Now, but even the modern day retail version of Final Fantasy XI still hangs on in many ways to that classic grind, the time investment, little things that it kind of pokes at you that force you to spend a lot of time in the game. It's not as bad, but they're still there. The biggest difference is it got away from, all the time invested in travel, obviously needing a full party of real players with trusts. Little things like that add up and start to shave away at all that time that was just kind of sucked into Final Fantasy XI. Time that a lot of us appreciated and loved, and it made Final Fantasy XI what it was. But that's not why we're here. We always complain that it took too long to get places, it took too long to find a full party, and that it could take a lot of time to earn gil and gear to support your character development. I think it could have been way worse. Let's talk about it. Final Fantasy XI only really had two vehicles of note that you could take advantage of in the game: boats and the airship. Both are pretty similar. You had to wait till the boat or airship to arrive to pick you up, get on it, wait for it to leave, and then actually experience the travel as it went from point A to point B before finally letting you off. This is often, complained about because A, if you just miss it, it is a lot like real life in that you have to wait for the full round trip for the next one to come around. It isn't like multiple versions of the boat or airship looping around at the same time. There's only the one, so you have to wait till it gets all the way to its destination, stops, waits for new passengers, comes all the way back, stops, you can get on, waits for all the passengers, and then leaves again. This could be like 20 minutes. It was actually pretty significant. And even if you're not like just missing it, waiting 5 to 10 minutes for an airship or a boat to come around is kind of annoying. Don't get me wrong, that sounds super frustrating in 2021. But in theory, if everybody's there at that airship or boat, everybody can hop on. There is no limit to the number of people. But what if there was? What if airships and boats were a lot like planes and buses in real life, and there were a limited number of spaces, and if you started to run out, and you didn't have a ticket or a seat, then you weren't getting on that one? What if it got so bad that travel was so beloved by players in game that every flight was booked for like weeks and months out? You had to schedule this far off distant day. I will get to Kazam. I can't do it for like another 2 months. My flight's scheduled for 3 a.m. in October, but I am pumped about it. Can't wait to go to Kazam. What if chocobos were the same way? What if there were a limited number of chocobos in the stable, and if they were all, booked and being used out in the wilds, chocoboing around, that was it. There weren't any more chocobos. It would be kind of funny if like you're shouting to friends in your link shell, like, is Upper Juno? Are there any chocobos in Upper Juno? I'm down in Port. There's nothing. It's empty here. You'd like find the last chocobo in Juno, and then they would kind of like run back into the stables when somebody got off one in the middle of nowhere, and you might be able to catch it. Is that the same thing where you kind of get a ticket and you're like number 45 and they're like 38 and you're like, oh my god, there's so many people waiting for chocobos? What if the airship pass, the chocobo license required renewal? What if you had to resubmit every 4 years of in-game time to see if you're still qualified to ride a chocobo? What if it was the same quest again where you just had to like kind of convince a chocobo to love you by feeding it and taking care of it? What was that quest? There were Gishal greens. We fed it. Was it a sick chocobo? I kind of forget the process. Why were we entrusted with a chocobo license after that? Doesn't really make any sense. Did anyone teach us how to ride one? I feel like that's the most important thing. Actual practice. Maybe not. Most people earn the airship pass from, I think, the regular missions. Isn't it a reward from like rank 5 or 6? But you could also just buy one for like 500k. What if it ran out? What if that airship pass was only valid for like a year? and then you need to buy a new one. Maybe the first one was free because of the missions, but then you had to buy, you head back to Aldo or whoever gave it to you, and you're like, can I have another one? He's like, no, I spent a lot of money on that airship pass. You got one, buy a new one. Of course, these weren't the only ways to travel in Final Fantasy XI. Teleports, warps were very popular and easy to come by through the white mage or black mage jobs. People would pay for teleports and warps all over the place. It was one of the easiest and most effective ways of player-driven travel. What if it wasn't? I'm laughing because it's so funny to think of taking all the most complained about aspects of Final Fantasy XI and just making them worse. What if teleports were based on a certain, level of skill? And not skill as we know, because it's pretty easy to keep white magic capped, if you absolutely have to. Or is it enhancing magic? Is that what drives teleports? I think it might be enhancing magic. It's kind of silly. Regardless, what if it was this whole other skill that's actually pretty difficult to level up, or maybe it was only leveled up by teleports, and until you maxed that skill out, or even once you did, there was always the chance that the teleport could fail, but failure would mean it sent you to the wrong location, which could be a different crag, or could be the middle of nowhere. This sounds super annoying, but it would actually be kind of like cool from a character interaction development, because players would obviously sell themselves as being more expensive if they had a higher skill level. They would include like, I'm capped skill, there's a 95% chance that you'll end up at your destination, and only 5% chance that you don't, and out of that 5% chance that you don't, 100% chance that you'll survive. Whereas like somebody who just started teleporting, they're like, hey, free teleports, just trying to skill it up. There is literally a 85% chance that you'll end up in the wrong spot, and if you do, very likely it'll be in a Gobu nest or something stupid. I'd like to see a Gobu nest. Warps could be the same thing. Half the time they send you back to your home point, half the time they send you back into a boss fight where you just die. I mean, that's ridiculous, of course. They would send you to Devoy every time. 100%. Maybe the warp spell was a spell that was like learned and borrowed from the Beastmen. So it's been kind of, I want to say warped, but obviously it doesn't make any sense, but transitioned to fit the crystals and home points. But originally it just sourced to this one spot in Devoy. So like whenever it fails, it's like, oh right, Devoy. It just shoves you into that location. It'd be kind of amusing. The difference between teleports and warps, though, if you did a warp 2 on somebody, you're not really at risk. You're just like, hey, I'll send you to your home point, maybe, but I'm still going to be here safe. Of course, this is all about travel. I mean, some of the foundational aspects of Final Fantasy XI, the sub-job system, jobs, all were relying on the fact that you could change those in the city and be any job at any time. Of course, unless you couldn't. Now we could say that like you can't change jobs or sub-jobs, but that seems kind of limiting and kind of takes away from one of the things that made Final Fantasy XI so special. That's not what we want to do. No. You had to be in the Mog House. What if the Mog House was like a hotel and had a limited number of rooms? A, there would be a fee for you to use the Mog House and have access to it that you have to continue paying if you want to have continuous access, but also it might be booked. Look at Final Fantasy XIV right now. Nobody can find any plots anywhere. Still, to this day, they're like running out of plots constantly. But what if that was the only way to change jobs, access your mob safe, even check deliveries? Can you imagine if you didn't have any money because you're trying to sell something on the auction house, but you couldn't get into the Mog safe to get the delivery of the money from the auction house because you didn't have any money for the stuff you sold in the auction house to pay for the room? Man, that sounds miserable. I wonder if any of these ideas were like on the drawing board and someone was like, nah, this is too much. This is, I mean, I joke, but there is stuff like this in EverQuest. Like originally, there was early on where one of the most fundamental aspects is determining what direction am I facing, because there are no maps and a lot of it is just making sure like you're going east, west, north, south, and continuing in that direction. But when you first enter the game, your ability to do that, your skill is 0. So you're just like, what direction am I facing? And it's like, you have no idea. You have no idea. You have no idea. It might be north. You have no idea. And people would just like use it over and over again to skill it up. But like, it's sort of similar to some of these concepts. Okay, so you can't change jobs, at least not easily, and not if you're poor. You can't travel very easily. The chocobo's kind of a pain. Walking is always an option. But what if you got tired? What if, believably, after wandering the wilds for a certain amount of time, let's say like 15 to 20 minutes just of continuous running or walking on auto run, you've hit a stamina cap and collapsed and needed to rest. not only could you maybe limit the effectiveness in combat if you're in this state, but when you're in that state, you would either walk incredibly slowly or have to sit down and just rest, kind of like when you rest MP or HP, until you get it back. Can you imagine the run to Juno if halfway there you just like had to find a safe nook by the side of the road and rest for like 15 minutes until your legs were like recuperated? Oh my gosh. So that actually sounds kind of cool from like an immersion perspective, sort of like a survival game kind of thing. But man, the frustration of like literally just trying to get to a safe place and your legs just are giving out, especially early on in the game. I would assume your skill level and your overall strength would be lower. So like you'd get tired more often. So just getting further and further from like the town would become more and more difficult. And of course, the easiest way to rest would be get back to your monk house, but you can't afford it because all the rooms are booked and the prices have skyrocketed, let's be honest. It's like a Four Seasons up here. Of course, Final Fantasy XI's classic way of making this incredibly difficult and challenging game more approachable was to allow you to group up with other real players and take on challenging things in a group. But what if you could only do it once a day, once an hour, once every 6 hours? From a developer perspective, if you're saying, this is ridiculous, nobody would ever do this is such a dumb idea, but a developer could say that this would encourage players to keep leveling, not leave their party, keeping players in the game longer, which is something that, you know, a manager might appreciate, saying like, your idea is going to keep more players in Final Fantasy XI? I like it. Let's do it. Not really understanding the full overall impact. But of course, I think that's how we got with like dailies and stuff like that too. Is the developer said, yeah, I can keep players coming back every day. And the managers were like, definitely implement those features. And developers were like, there may be a side effect of players hating it, hating it so much. But not just that. I mean, this would open up new camps as parties had to dissolve. You know, if you lose 2 critical players and can't find new ones because those players that you may replace with have already partied that day, they just have to leave. So more camp availability at various level ranges. Finding new players would be more difficult, which would incur a tighter knit social interaction and probably more statics as people want to take the best possible advantage of the time that they have in that party. So they want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and has the same expectations of what's going to happen in this obvious 12-hour party that you can never leave because you need to make the most progress you possibly can. Can you imagine? What if you just disconnected? I'm done playing for the day. But guys, none of this compares to the ultimate time sink, which is that when you died, you lost experience. The parties that I just discussed, you could spend hours and then a couple attempts at a mission, quest, boss fight, just going somewhere trying to solo something on your own. Maybe just an accident. Who knows what happened? You're dead, you've lost experience, and now all that work that you did in the past few hours seems to have gone away. Or literally has gone away. I think that is a little too frustrating, and it encourages players to work hard not to die, but it allows that death. We should get rid of that. Hardcore mode is the only way to play. When you die, your character is deleted and it's gone. How many players would last? I constantly think of like the, like Sword Art Online concept and other shows like that where they're just plopped in, but if they die for real. We're not gonna go that far. We're not maniacs. But how many players do you think would still be playing 11 if it was hardcore and you would just be dead? I feel like nobody would have made it past like the first few hours. Somebody inevitably fights something too difficult. Guys, what do you think? Are any of these good? Would they actually have improved the overall experience, or have I just touched on all some of the biggest pain points about how Final Fantasy XI could take time away from the player, and not necessarily always in a meaningful way, but just in kind of like time sinks, and I've made them worse? I'd love to know your ideas for ways to make Final Fantasy XI the most frustrating game ever played. Definitely leave them in the comments below, or join us on streams at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We play a lot of Final Fantasy XI as well as a lot of other stuff, and we'd definitely love to see you out there with your own ideas about how Final Fantasy XI could be made much worse. Otherwise, keep on the lookout for more videos like this, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.
Yeah, I think we probably will need the body, right? And the avatar out, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So if you could do that.
All right. What are you asking? I want you to very clearly define your request.
Sorry, I'm asking you to die. Die a horrible death over and over again.